right, guys. First of all, good morning, and thank you so much for joining us. We are very, very happy, privileged, and excited to have our friends from Yigal Anon and our friends from iAngels join us for one of, I believe it's iAngels Entrepreneurship, about the Blockchain Breakfast Club, and we are happy to host it at BDO House. I think that everybody here, and obviously the number of attendees, can actually reflect how appealing, trendy, very, very well-focused the whole issue of blockchain today in the world of technologies. And I think that it's very, very exciting to see and actually to predict what the future holds for the world of blockchain and where the technology can go to. I think that today's conversations, presentations, and panels that we're going to have are going to be dealing with some major interesting impacts on all processes around blockchain technology involvement and implementation within the different industries. And I think that everybody can get a great sense of what they can get back with them into their own operation as far as focusing and blending in with the evolving environment. Again, thank you so much, Yigal Anon, and thank you so much, iAngels, for assisting with this establishment. And I think that we would like to start with Ido Sadeh from Saga. Ido, if you want to join us. And we're going to have Mo Asya from iAngels. They're going to start a discussion about... yeah. All right.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our Blockchain Breakfast Club. This time around, we're interviewing Ido Sadeh from Saga. And just for people who are less acquainted with this forum, this expert series and what it means, essentially, approximately once a month, we hold this Blockchain Breakfast Club, inviting investors, developers, entrepreneurs from the ecosystem to learn more about the way that we view investment opportunities and specific projects that are happening in Israel. We at iAngels have started investing in blockchain-related companies as part of our VC arm like 2-3 years ago, and via that expertise that has built within the company, in 2017 we really started investing and looking into projects and potential ICOs, and been very active in the space. We invite you all to our platform to learn more about our research and some of the projects that we are involved with. And so thank you again, BDO and our team members, the iAngels team members that have helped put this together. And with your permission, we'll dive in. We're going to have a conversation to learn more from Ido's experience and about Saga, and thereafter we're going to open up to Q&A. So feel free to kind of like remember the question that you had, and we'll have time for that at the end. So just leading us in, tell us a little bit about yourself and the motivation to start Saga.
Sure. First, thank you for having me. Can you hear me at the back?
No,
you can't. I don't know how much closer I can bring the speaker in. Can you hear me better? Still not. So I think I'll probably on mic.
Okay.
Then I'll switching anyhow. Can you hear me now? Great. So thanks for having me. Actually, I've made quite an eclectic journey, I believe. Starting, so up until 12 years ago, I was a jazz musician, mostly playing in Paris, and then got back here to Rimon. And about 12 years ago, I crossed to the dark side of the Israeli startup industry, starting from QA roles, teaching myself to code, then did some mostly product management, consumer product management, headed the product for Odyssey, a company that was sold to Gil Barkov at Root. Later leading the product for Mobley, being the CEO of Mobley and co-founding Singularity. And actually, about a year ago, I was on my way out, feeling that I'm no longer learning anything when I'm coming to, or not enough when I'm coming in the morning to the office, feeling that I've lost the passion to do what I'm doing, and wanted to go and study political science. And as a farewell gift to the fund, I suggested that now that I'm no longer running an operation, and while I'm phasing out, I should probably look a bit deeper into blockchain. And it took me about 3 weeks to realize that I'm not going anywhere, that probably political science has come to our field rather than us going to the academia for it, and that I'm here to stay for the next 20 years. And so the saga began.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about specifically what you learned and what you realized that what kind of challenges you saw in the ecosystem that you wanted to crack.
Sure. So I'll divide it into two. One is what did I find exciting about blockchain, and the second one is what excited me personally to start exploring. So I'll start by something that might sound surprising. Blockchain is a very bad technology. From an efficiency perspective, from a computation cost perspective, anything that can be done with blockchain can be done better with technologies that are probably 30 years old, except for one thing, which is governance. It really answers to the question who takes the decisions or who is in control of the ecosystem. And there are two stances to engage. The original one was resistance to censorship. So blockchain is a technology that was given birth by Bitcoin as an application, and the claim to fame was censorship resistance. If I have money and if I want to transfer it to you, no one should be able to tell me what to do with my money, and I don't need to rely on any third-party intermediary to be able to control my value. It's rather an anarchist perception, anarchist or libertarians, but very much resembling of, it's best said in Hebrew because of this unforgettable, I don't know if it's a BDO one, commercial, אתה לא תחליט עליי, או את לא מחליטה עליי. That was the claim to fame.
You won't decide.
Yes. But I'm not an anarchist, and so it wasn't appealing to me. I do believe that we need censorship. I believe that we need human agency, and censorship in the sense that if we want to collaborate, we each have to decide an amount of freedom that we are ready to relinquish for governance in order to create an organized human agency. And I think that I've probably been an anarchist until the age of 17 or something. That's very romantic, but I think that the perception that without any governance mechanisms, the world will organize in some harmonious chaos is romantic, utopic, and I don't believe in its feasibility. However, the fact that governance needs to be impartial it was not invented with blockchain. It was invented with the nation state, with the social contract by Rousseau 300 years ago. The fact that the logic of the contract should be governed regardless of who comes to be judged by it. And I think we've lost some of the impartiality, and I think that the real promise of blockchain is to create contracts with human agency, with governance, but where the governance is code-driven, at least to some extent, and much more impartial. So we can have much more honest contract in the sense that a contract needs to apportion the investment and the value that is drawn from the contract, right? Any contract wants to get to have the parties gain and invest something that is proportional. And I think that blockchain gives us the ability to do just that. However, as a consumer product professional, what fascinated me was the ability to program money. The thought that what we've done to information over the last 2 or 3 decades, which is to take a use case and frame information around this use case, could be now done to value. We could imagine that these proverbs like money has no smell or no color are not true anymore. I could give allowance to my child and decide where he can spend it, when he can spend it, what can't he spend it on. I can buy a car and only transfer the money when the DMV transfers ownership over the car. And this could be done without any external service. It could be programmed into the money itself. So this was the personal fascination. And that was the basis to start Saga.
So Saga is really looking to create a cryptocurrency that is working in collaboration with the traditional financial system. And the motivation is to create a stable coin. So there are a lot of people who are talking about stable coins. Let's talk a little bit about what that means and how Saga actually wants to do that.
So I just told you that what I wanted to do initially was to program money, but very early on we discovered that we don't have money to program yet. Because when we look at the 9 years elapsed, and back then 1,000 attempts, currently already 5,000, there is no single token or contender to be a currency that answers the three functions that are required to account for one, which is to be a store of value, a medium of exchange, and a unit of account. I think all would agree that none of the existing digital currencies are accounting for the three functions. The harsh critics would say that none of them accounts for any of the functions. And I would tend to agree. And so very early on, the question became, why do we have better governance mechanisms that are allowing us to create better monetary policy, but still we couldn't come up, 9 years and we couldn't come up with a currency. And we realized three main obstacles or challenges which became our agenda to address. The first one is about knowledge. Technology experts are leading the ride, but creating a currency is mostly about policy. And we simply don't have the knowledge. And we lost the ability to work interdisciplinarily with other professions and other disciplines. Creating a currency requires mathematicians and social scientists and economists and historians, because many of what we are attempting, of the things we're attempting to gain now, have been trialed in the past, and we have to learn from it. And also, obviously, a very strong technological corp to account for the tools to build a currency. It makes as much sense for the technology to build now a currency as it would have made in the 18th century for the brilliant engineers who invented the printing machines, the cheap printing machines to be the ones that are constructing a central banks. Simply because they invented a machine that can print bills. And the second challenge was the challenge of volatility. So for a currency to be a medium of exchange, if a merchant is to prefer our currency over any other currency, it is mostly about knowing that tomorrow morning she can meet her obligations, pay her employees or rent, etc. And she cannot do it with a currency with a raging volatility. And the third one is about identity. So this social contract or nation state is about enforcing accountability between participants. And it cannot do so if we obfuscate the identity of participants by building anonymous currencies. And if we are building anonymous currencies, then we at least don't get to be surprised that nation states are reluctant to adopt those new innovations of ours. And so these were the three pillars that we designed, that we set out to address: knowledge, volatility, and identity. To address knowledge, we started by forming a team which is not a technology startup team. Our head of research is a PhD in quantum physics. We have a mathematician from Trinity Cambridge, an historian from Oxford. Our chief economist is Barry Taff, who headed the monetary department in the Central Bank of Israel up until 3 years ago, and he's still a senior IMF advisor, mostly to developing countries trying to stabilize their currency. But when Barry joined, he was very concerned that we are building those Pisa towers, drinking our own Kool-Aid, and there are not many comparables to look at because we're really in uncharted territories. And so he wanted very quickly to summon some sounding boards, people that have actually led monetary policy and could keep us honest. And so first joined Professor Jacob Frankel, was the governor of the Central Bank of Israel and now the chairman of JP Morgan Chase International and the head of the G30. Later joined Professor Myron Scholes, the co-author of the Black and Scholes model and a Nobel Prize winner for it. Professor Dan Galai, one of the two co-inventors of the VIX, the volatility index. And from other fields, Professor Razchan Morris, the chair of the history department in the Hebrew University. And so we formed an advisory that could tackle all the disciplines that are involved in building a currency, and their role was mostly to attack us, to hustle us. to find, to ask the tough questions, to pass criticism, and our model has underwent 5 cycles of defense, very hard defense. They were very good at doing their job, and I believe it's better for it now. Just touching a bit as to the volatility, which is probably the fundament of the model. So we departed from the principle that a currency is just a quantifier of trust. It is worth what people are trusting that it is worth. And if so, when we launch Saga, we enjoy no trust, and therefore we get to enjoy no intrinsic value. So instead, we opted to launch Saga with 0 tokens or 0 coins when people buy the coins. When someone buys the coin from the contract, it creates a coin, and when someone sells it back to the contract, it burns the coin. And the coins are created, are purchased for initially $1.4, which is the price of 1 SDR unit. The SDR is a basket of currencies determined by the IMF, containing the 5 prominent currencies, the dollar, the pound, the euro, the yen, and the latest addition was the renminbi, or the Chinese yuan. And it is designed to hedge volatility between those currencies, and it is designed for states to host their reserves. So when someone purchases Saga with 1 SDR, this SDR is deposited in reserve with regulated banks. And so if he wants to send back this Saga to the contract, he will get back his SDR from the reserve. And at this time, Saga doesn't have a value. Its entire value is rooted in the value of the SDR it holds. But as more currency is issued, meaning more people opt to buy Saga, the model accounts it for a gathering of trust. And when trust is gathered, if a currency is just a quantifier of trust, then Saga starts developing an intrinsic value. So the way this intrinsic value is translated is into a gradual lowering of the reserve ratio in favor of an intrinsic appreciation of the price. Now, unlike human-based mechanisms, this works both ways without any a human decision, because trust can not only be gained, it can be lost as well. We see it constantly. When the price of a currency drops, it means that the trust in this currency is decreasing. And so in our system, when the trust decreases, the reserve ratio goes back up. Because if we are losing our intrinsic trust, we need to root it back in the SDR, which is already enjoying a stable trust. And this is our way to mitigate the creation of an intrinsic value of a currency with the fact that we contain volatility. But there are 2 additional elements to that. The first one is that we got an attack from our beloved professors that the fragility of this model is that it does not provide enough market listening. Because the supply will be determined by the market, but the price is determined algorithmically. And so what we've implemented is a variable price band, which means that as more Sagas are issued, there is a spread that is open between the bid and ask price of the contract to allow the market to settle the price in secondary markets within the price band, and for the contract to intervene only where an excess or shortage of money supply is required.
So the ratio is actually affected by the sentiment?
So the ratio is always affected by the supply and demand, but we're giving a degree of freedom for the market to decide of the price of Saga before we intervene, and we intervene only if the volatility exceeds the price band. Actually, we didn't invent anything, right? What we're really doing is what central banks did over the last 100 and some years, which is when bills were created, initially their value was entirely rooted in the previously trusted contract, which is gold, at 100%. Then Bretton Woods moving to a fractional reserve, and only in 71 to 73 departing completely from a golden standard. What we've been, and the price band as well, it's funny enough because Barry Toff and Jacob Frenkel were the 2 at the Central Bank of Israel that liberated the Israeli exchange rate as a central bank mandate, and they did it through the introduction of a variable price band, what would be called Retzuat al-Achson, on the way to completely liberate it to the market determination. So we're really not inventing anything. We're trying not to invent wheels when they're perfectly working and have proven to be useful. I think we have new technological means that allow us to do it better and to do it pre-modeled and not reliant on human decisions.
So I think one of the key premises is that you can really help the traditional financial system and the banks to connect and start working with crypto. And I think from different projects that we've seen and different talks that we've had, the primary concern of banks today is anti-money laundering, and how do you resolve that when you want to really accept crypto as a currency into the banking system. So tell us a little bit about that kind of connection with the traditional banking system and how you can do it, potentially you can do it, protect against money laundering better, and how do you do to support that process?
Sure. I think that first to be able to address those concerns, one needs to acknowledge them, and to acknowledge them as legitimate concerns. And I'm not sure that as an industry we're doing that enough. So we are acknowledging them from a stance that we are not here to threaten banks or to threaten fiat currencies. We are not entering into a qualitative debate of whether cryptocurrencies are better or less efficient than fiat currencies, but we believe to a counterpart, a global counterpart, complementary counterpart is required for fiat currencies. So fiat currencies are perfectly fine to deal with the national scope of trade and exchange of value, but there is increasingly a new scope of exchange of value, which is global, which is not affected by the same vectors of decisions of national currencies, which are mainly fiscal, political, and monetary decisions. And so initially our aim is not to compete, but to complement. And then again, being aware of accountability as a required feature, we are completely comprehending the two main concerns by regulators and the financial systems. One is, as you mentioned, the KYC and AML process, but the second one is the fear to market stability. Obviously, when it comes to currencies, when it comes to a widely adopted financial asset, this raging volatility is bringing fears to the stability of the markets. And I think that the reserve model that I just described is answering this fear. It's not answering anything in an absolute matter, but it is definitely addressing it in a way that financial institutions can understand. As to identity, what we've decided is the following. Anyone who wants to hold Saga needs to undergo a KYC process, know your customer or know your client, depending on the jurisdiction process. And this process is being encrypted on chain. So not even us are aware of the identity of our customers because it's encrypted. But it's encrypted with 3 signatures. One is given to the participant, the other one remains with the Saga Foundation, and the third one is given to the state with which document this participant has underwent the KYC process. And only by joining 2 signatures out of the 3 can the identity of a customer be unveiled. So if you're an Israeli customer and Israeli authorities would subpoena us to reveal your identity, we will join our signature to the state signature and your identity would be unveiled. It's a no-only feature, so there are no seizing of funds. In this regards, we're not answering everything that the state requires, but we're answering more than others. And so I think nation states and regulators are starting to realize that the reality is changing around them, and that they need to address it by policy, because no one found any uninvent button. So whether they like it or not, it's here to stay. And now the regulators are looking for ways to address it in an optimal way, and I think we're trying to provide one.
Excellent. So let's talk about exactly like the coins. So if you want to say, you said somebody wants to purchase a Saga coin, they go to the contract, they can buy Saga coins in the contract, and they can hold them, they can use them for different means. Let's talk a little bit about that and the motivation to hold the Saga coin. And essentially, I think what's interesting specifically about Saga is that the fact that you're really not doing an ICO properly, and people who want to buy the Saga coin will have to buy it through the contract. So let's talk about that, because I think that is fairly unique.
So our aim is to be a currency, which means that we need to be a medium of exchange and a store of value at the same time. But we're not luring ourselves. No one can declare itself a medium of exchange. This is for the public and for merchants to declare. And as many other applications that are based on a network effect. This requires to resolve a chicken and egg problem. Not very different than I like to use the Instagram example. Why would I upload any photos to Instagram when it was launched if my friends are not there? And why would my friends be there if I'm not uploading any photos? In the same token, why would I hold Saga if no pun intended. Why would I hold Saga if no merchant accepts it? And why would any merchant accept it if no one holds it? And the solution to both is very similar. It's a single user value solution. In Instagram, it was filters. So upload your photos, your lousy iPhone 2 issued photos, put our filters on them, embellish them, and then go share them where your friends are. And if this is creating enough traction, then we will bring a network effect, which would later allow us to become a social network. In the currency world, the single user value is the store of value. It is bring your value to us. We will prove trustworthy in striking a good balance between a prospect of growth and stability. And when enough people come to store their value with us, then we've created a network that starts justifying merchants accepting Saga and people holding it for such. So I think it's a gradual process. I expect in the next 2 to 3 years to be focused on the store of value feature of Saga to demonstrate first to ourselves and to the public that our algorithm is indeed striking the balance that we hope it will before we can tackle the medium of exchange feature. And in this, we're looking at two main markets. The first one is the crypto markets. There are people that are holding very significant amounts of money in cryptocurrencies that are looking for solutions to unsubscribe from volatility. It's no longer a game. There are people that are holding tremendous amounts of money that just lost 3 weeks or a month ago about 30% of their holdings. And so to them we're providing a solution which is definitely less energetic. They cannot expect to have the same carry with us, but they can expect to have a mitigated risk. On the other end, family offices, institutionals, etc., are living in a world where high convertibility assets are enjoying zero interest rate, looking at negative interest rate. But still, they're looking at digital currencies and they cannot tap into their energy because the volatility is raging. And in this regards, we are offering a sort of middle way. And these are the two first audiences we're going to address. One more thing maybe that I haven't mentioned, our reserves are hosted with regulated banks. That's the first scope of cooperation with banking. But the second scope is to offer the banks to deposit money directly into the reserve, to issue Saga for their customers, and to have them managed in managed accounts.
Reserve is kept in fiat or in
Yes, it's kept in fiat. And basically what we offer the bank is to manage Saga just like any other center of treasury, any other foreign currency, because in the long run, my mother is not going to hold her blockchain wallet. She's not going to remember her private key. She's not going to buy a safe. And it's not only my mother, it's my brother as well. I mean, it's not only about, it's not about the maturity of the technology, it's about the physical element, which is the following: human agency is required. If I want to go and have surgery, I want the doctor to do it to me. I don't want to learn to do it to myself. At the same time, if I want my money to be managed, at least to some extent, I want it to be managed by people who have the expertise and the means to manage money for me. Otherwise, the user experience is by design compromised. You know, I've understood it profoundly when 6 months ago I had to go to Switzerland to meet our law office and the Swiss regulator, and the market was raging, and I found myself asking myself whether I'm taking my ledger, my personal blockchain wallet with me to be able to react to the market, but at the same time it's quite frightening to take some assets with me in my pocket and to fly around with it. And I decided to leave it in the safe and virtually to disconnect myself from the possibility to manage my assets in a way that does not exist with my bank account or with my stock portfolio. This is a far inferior user experience. And I think that if managed services are to be provided, there is probably no better establishment to do that than the banking system. So this is also a difference between Saga and other currencies, which is this linkage that we're trying not to avoid, but on the contrary, to create with the banking system as providers of service for handling Saga.
I have to ask, you think that through this kind of relationship, the banking system is going to kind of like move in the direction of some of the advantages that exist in our, in the crypto industry of at least response times, flexibility? Because currently, although I agree, you could fly to Switzerland and still log into your bank account and manage and look at what's happening that you couldn't do with your wallet. Still, probably, even if you did want to wire funds or do any transaction in your bank when you're in Switzerland, the amount of time it would take for it to happen, you could just like fly back and do it on your own when you come back. So the lagging is still there, and it's inherent to the system.
Yeah, I think that for sure blockchain technologies and counterpartyless transactions are going to influence the services that banks are going to give as well. And I'm not suggesting that one could not enjoy the advantages of both. So if you're holding Saga, you can always hold Saga in your ERC20 wallet, whatever it is, but you can also hold it as a managed service. I think that banks are looking at it. They're obviously moving slower, but they're starting to move, and especially it depends on the market demand. As the market is expanding for those currencies and those solutions, then banks are reacting to the demand. We're seeing several major banks, both in the US and in Europe, starting to react to this demand. Some are even considering accepting crypto assets as such. But it will take time. I think that this is probably, many people like to compare blockchain to the internet, and I humbly disagree. I think that it's a far bigger revolution. I think that the internet, we've seen across history that the first thing to change usually is the communication contract. The scope of communication, the intensity of communication changes. The printing, the chip printing revolution was the last significant change to the communication contract. I could now speak not only to my neighbor or to my professor at school, I could read books, and I could share ideas and eventually value and identities with people that are that are far remoter than where I am. And I think we've had our share of the communication revolution with the internet. What we're seeing though is that governance is always responding to this communication revolution, because if I can exchange value with a new scope of people, then I need a currency to be able to do that, and I need probably a government to be able to regulate this exchange of value. And so with the chip printing machines, we saw the birth of the central bank, the nation state, the corporate. I think that blockchain is the answer to the internet. It's not it's not similar to it. Our communication has changed. There is now a global and non-state-based scope of exchange of value, and it needs to have a governance answer. And I think that blockchain is probably the governance answer to that. And I'm saying it in just in the context that it will take a lot of time, because it's a really major change in paradigm, much bigger, I think, than the one it took us to absorb with the internet, because it touches the sheer essence of governance, the sovereignty of states, many paradigms that are much slower and harder to change and to adapt to.
How much is a long time to you?
I think we'll see stages. I don't want to try and give any prophecy, but I think it's decades. I think we'll see it in stages, and it's about decades, because probably the stronger thing to change is our collective imagination that is forming these evidences, right? There are many things that we're imagining collectively, and sounds to us as though they're part of our nature, right? The state, it's pure fiction. The bank is a pure fiction. A corporate is a pure an entity that has judiciary liability and with representation and the capability to raise debt, etc. That's a fiction. It's simply a fiction that we all agree to, so it's becoming a reality. Contesting those fictions is taking a lot of time because we've been born to them and we're now trying to change them. Try imagining the suggestion of a corporate to the king 300 years ago, who used to the fact that only he can raise debt and only to go to war, and now you're starting to come with these structures that can raise debt and collateral together and be managed by representation, etc. It would have seen as probably imaginary as what I'm discussing now. It's hard for us to question our base paradigms, and so I think it will take a long time.
Great. So last question before we open to Q&A, because I want us to have a little bit of time for that. Tell us a little bit about Saga as a company and the difference between Saga Genesis, how you correspond with investors, because there is a difference between the SGA coin and the Saga Genesis.
So Saga is a foundation, actually. It's not even a company. And I love this structure because it was not invented by us, it was invented by Ethereum in Switzerland, and we're really following the path of Ethereum in this one with the same law office under the same structure. And the structure of the foundation is the following. It is not for profit, it has no beneficiary owners. The owner of the foundation is its purpose. You declare a purpose which you cannot change afterwards without dismantling the foundation. And obviously the founders, the investors, the team are for profit. So the way to represent this profit incentive is that initially when you found the foundation, you distribute tokens. And the only way for anyone to aspire for a profit is for the token value to rise. And it only rises if the value of what the foundation provides to any participant rises. And so there is an aligned set of incentives. There is only one way to make money out of it for all stakeholders, which is not the case in a corporate. If a corporate, God forbid, succeeds, then you start seeing a divergence of incentives. What the founders want is not necessarily what the investor wants, and what the A round investor wants is not necessarily what the C round investor wants. And then you go public, and then there's the issue of equity and control. And in a foundation structure, you don't have all of it, because everyone is holding the same token. This token is liquid and is given its price by the market. And you cannot expect, and it has nothing to do with the control of the foundation. And so you cannot expect to have this diversion of incentives. However, it challenged us because we could not raise money for Saga in Saga. It would all go into the reserve and not into fund the project. So we had to ask ourselves two questions. Who are we raising from and how are we raising? The first one was easy. We're not doing an ICO. We determined it very quickly on for two reasons. One is that it didn't seem coherent to us to start a journey of creating a low speculation, low volatility currency by addressing the public and offering it to speculate whether we'll succeed or not. We much rather addressing accredited investors, people that are more risk hungry by design, and that they have all the tools to understand completely the risk they're taking and to ask us the hard question. The second reason is that eventually building Saga is building a propelling value proposition, and it's a hard task. We're really building the first decentral bank, and we're going to need all the help we can get, and we're probably going to get it more from institutions that were built to help projects succeed than from someone who invested in the right time in Ethereum. I'm very happy for them, but we invite them to buy Saga, not Saga Genesis. And then the question of how do we raise, we solve by constructing a second token called Saga Genesis, which is pre-modeled call option on Saga. So it's convertible to Saga. It's not reserve backed because it's going to fund the project. It's a higher risk, and so it deserves a higher reward. So it has a dynamic conversion ratio to Saga, which is dependent on the price of Saga. So I, Angels, as an investor, initially, before we launched Saga, meet the risk because we haven't created value yet. And when Saga is still 100% reserve backed, it has no intrinsic value, so you still meet the risk. But as soon as the price of Saga increases, you start meeting more reward. And at a certain balance point, which is when there are $630 million in. Do you?
Yeah.
Okay. When there are $630 million in reserve, one Saga, the risk is being absorbed, and then you start seeing the reward, because sending one Saga Genesis to the contract will allow you to get more than one Saga. Again, in a dynamic ratio, we cap that ratio at 15 times multiplier, because we don't want angels to be in control of the global economy in case we succeed. So it was a way to balance the wish to create a coherent risk-reward vector that is suitable of venture investment and protect the Saga economy.
Yes. So let's do 3 questions. 2 questions.
No.
Yes, 2 questions.
Yes.
How is
Fast.
it different from Tether? And one of the biggest pitfalls in Tether is being completely centralized and controlled by one party. And this is very similar here, because if the reserve is being seized by one of the governments, it means there's completely no value. Not cash out, my Saga.
Repeat the question.
So how is it different than Tether? And how do we avoid a counterparty risk? The fact that the reserve is deposited with central entities such as banks and are subject to seizing, right? Okay. So the difference with Tether is simple. Tether is a token of the dollar. It's not a currency, it's a currency board. It's not aiming at any intrinsic value, but aiming to be a token used in a cryptography environment, in a blockchain environment, but to always reproduce the price of the dollar. Meaning there is no chance that Tether will gain any intrinsic value, because it's not designed to. We are not using the reserve as an end. We're using the reserve as crutches. On our way to an intrinsic value, we are anchoring in contracts that are already enjoying trust. But at the end goal, when Saga reaches $3 trillion market size, we are with no reserves whatsoever anymore. And on the way there, the reserve decreases constantly. And this answered the second question as well. It's true, there is a counterparty risk when you're hosting a reserve. There are many ways to mitigate it, which we are doing, like not to host it in one bank and not even in one jurisdiction, but to spread the reserve as further as we can. Another difference with Tether is that we are not telling the world how much we have in reserve. The banks are every day signing it on chain, so no one needs to trust us as to how much there is in reserve. But I think that your question brings this sort of dichotomy a language that we're used to use in the blockchain environment. Decentralization for us is not an end, it's a mean. It's a means to resolve agent dilemma. How can I know that if, or how can you know that if I'm saying I'm working for you, I'm really working for you? But this problem needs to be weighted against other problems. There is a counterparty risk. It needs to be weighted against volatility. Now, if you ask yourself what happens more, prominent banks in prominent jurisdictions being subject to bankruptcy, or Bitcoin and the such losing tens of % of their volume, I think that the answer of where the weighting stands currently is clear. The reserve ratio mechanism is exactly a mechanism to weigh those two risks, the counterparty risk versus the risk of volatility. And as we believe that the risk of volatility decreases because the network effect grows, we diminish the counterparty risk because the reserve ratio diminishes.
That was two questions in one. So I think although we have many more questions in the audience, let's take it afterwards, because I see the questions are taking too long. So really, thank you for joining us, and welcome everyone to learn more about Saga via iAngels and join our network at iangels.co. Thank you for having us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.